The crystal chandeliers caught the light in a way that made Harrison Miller feel exposed, as though every eye in the upscale restaurant was on him rather than on his sister, the rightful center of attention tonight. He tugged at his tie, already regretting his decision to come straight from the office instead of changing first. Being CEO of Miller Construction meant long days, and this engagement dinner had been scheduled at the last minute, typical of his impulsive sister, Olivia. Harry. Olivia squealed, spotting him from across the private dining room. She rushed over, champagne sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her flute. "You made it. I was starting to think you'd stand us up for some boring meeting and miss celebrating my only sister's engagement." "Never," Harrison replied, embracing her with one arm. "Just running a company that employs 300 people, nothing important." Olivia rolled her eyes, immune to his sarcasm after 30 years of siblinghood. "Come meet everyone. You know Ethan's family, but my friends from the art gallery are here too." Harrison allowed himself to be pulled through the crowd, accepting congratulations and making small talk as Olivia introduced him around. He'd met Ethan's parents at previous family gatherings, conservative but kind people who owned a chain of pharmacies across the state. He'd immediately approved of Ethan, a pediatric surgeon who clearly adored Olivia. "And this," Olivia said, pulling Harrison toward a woman with her back to them, "is my best friend from the gallery and maid of honor, Julia. Jules, turn around and meet my big brother." The woman turned, and Harrison felt an unexpected jolt. Julia Gardner had the kind of face that made you want to keep looking, warm brown eyes, a generous mouth curved into a natural smile, and dark waves of hair pulled back into a simple updo that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. "So you're the infamous workaholic brother," she said, extending her hand. "Olivia talks about you constantly." Harrison took her hand, noting the strength in her grip. "All terrible things, I'm sure. Mostly about how you build things that touch the sky but can't find time to call your mother," Julia replied, her eyes twinkling. "Guilty," Harrison admitted, surprisingly not irritated by the gentle rebuke. "But I'm working on it." "He's building that new children's hospital downtown," Olivia jumped in, pride evident in her voice. "The one with the rooftop garden." Julia's eyes widened slightly. "The Sunshine Project, that's yours?" Harrison nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. He preferred letting his buildings speak for themselves. "My company's handling the construction, yes. I've been following that project in the architectural journals. The integration of healing spaces with nature is remarkable." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, not the feigned interest he often encountered at business functions. Before he could respond, Ethan called for everyone to take their seats. Harrison found himself seated directly across from Julia at the long table. "So you're interested in architecture?" Harrison asked as servers poured wine. "I'm a curator at the Westbrook Gallery, specializing in architectural photography and design," Julia replied. "Olivia and I met when she started working there last year. My dissertation was actually on the evolution of sustainable design in urban hospitals." Harrison leaned forward, intrigued. "You're kidding. That's exactly what we're trying to pioneer with the Sunshine Project." "I know," Julia said, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I may have specifically requested a tour last month, but when I mentioned my connection to Olivia, they said you were out of town." "I was in Singapore looking at their vertical garden implementations," Harrison said, surprised at how easily conversation flowed with her. Normally, small talk at these functions was painful. "I'd be happy to show you around the site sometime." The evening progressed, and Harrison found himself engaged in the most stimulating conversation he'd had in months. Julia wasn't just knowledgeable about architecture, she was passionate about how spaces affected people. Between courses, Harrison barely noticed the time passing. When Ethan's father stood to make a toast, Harrison realized with surprise that 2 hours had flown by. "To new beginnings and family bonds," Ethan's father concluded, raising his glass. As everyone clinked glasses, Julia's eyes met Harrison's. There was something there, a connection, a spark of interest that mirrored his own. He'd been so focused on expanding Miller Construction over the past 5 years that dating had become perfunctory, scheduled like business meetings. This felt different. "How long are you in town for?" Harrison asked as dessert was served. Julia tilted her head. "I live here, have for 3 years. "Really? How have we never met before?" "Olivia says you're allergic to her art events," Julia teased. "And I'm allergic to corporate fundraisers, so our paths probably wouldn't cross naturally." Harrison laughed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Fair enough. Though I might have to reconsider my allergy if you'll be at the gallery's spring exhibition." "Are you actually asking me out while your sister is celebrating her engagement?" Julia asked, her voice low and amused. "No," Harrison replied quickly, then seeing her smile falter slightly, added, "I'm asking if you'd like to see the Sunshine Project tomorrow. Professionally speaking, the tour you requested." Julia's smile returned, brighter than before. "Professionally speaking, I'd love that." They exchanged numbers, and Harrison felt uncharacteristically nervous as he typed her contact into his phone. He was 35, ran a company worth millions, and regularly negotiated deals with hardened business people. Yet here he was, feeling like a teenager asking someone to prom. The evening wound down, and Harrison found himself lingering, reluctant to leave. As guests began departing, he offered to walk Julia to her car. "I actually took a rideshare," she admitted as they stepped outside into the cool spring evening. "The gallery had an event earlier, and I came straight from there." "I can drive you home," Harrison offered immediately. Julia hesitated. "That's kind, but it's out of your way. I live in Riverside." "I'm in Westmont, just across the bridge," Harrison replied, surprised again. "We're practically neighbors." "Neighbors separated by about 10 tax brackets," Julia laughed, but accepted his offer. During the drive to her apartment, Harrison learned Julia had grown up in the Midwest, studied art history at Columbia, and moved to their city for the position at Westbrook. She lived alone except for a rescue cat named Pixel. She asked thoughtful questions about his work, not the usual queries about how much money he made or which celebrities he'd built homes for. When they arrived at her building, a converted warehouse with large windows and exposed brick, Harrison felt an unusual reluctance to end the evening. "So tomorrow?" he asked, pulling up to the curb. "Text me the details," Julia replied, unclicking her seatbelt. She hesitated, then added, "This was nice. Meeting you, I mean. Olivia always made you sound so." "Boring, uptight, married to my job," Harrison supplied. Julia laughed. "Intimidating, but you're not, really. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." After Julia went inside, Harrison sat in his car for a moment, processing the unexpected turn his evening had taken. He'd gone to Olivia's engagement dinner out of familial duty, expecting tedious small talk and overpriced food. Instead, he'd met someone who made him feel more alive in a few hours than he had in years. The next morning, Harrison woke earlier than usual, anticipation humming through him. He texted Julia, suggesting they meet at the construction site at 10. Her response came quickly, "Perfect." Wearing hard hat-appropriate attire. "Does that mean I should leave my ball gown at home?" Harrison found himself smiling at his phone, something his assistant would have found shocking. He was known for his no-nonsense approach, his dedication to precision and excellence. Playful wasn't a word anyone would associate with him. At the site, Harrison waited near the entrance, checking his watch. At exactly 10, a taxi pulled up and Julia stepped out. She wore dark jeans, ankle boots, and a simple blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail and she carried a leather messenger bag. "Good morning," she called, approaching with a smile. "Ready to show me your masterpiece in progress?" "It's not my masterpiece," Harrison replied, handing her a hard hat and safety vest. "I'm just the builder." "The architects work with your vision," Julia interrupted. "I've read the interviews, Harrison. This project has your fingerprints all over it." Harrison felt uncharacteristically seen. Most people viewed him as the money behind the company, not understanding his personal involvement in each design. The tour began formally, with Harrison explaining the technical aspects of the hospital's innovative design. But as they moved through the partially constructed building, something shifted. Julia asked insightful questions that revealed her deep understanding of how spaces affected healing. She noticed details even some of his project managers missed. "The way you've positioned the windows here," she said, standing in what would become a children's ward. "The light will move across the room throughout the day, creating different experiences in the same space." "Exactly," Harrison replied, impressed. "Studies show changing natural light patterns help patients maintain normal circadian rhythms, which speeds recovery." "And reduces anxiety," Julia added. "The brain responds to static environments by becoming more alert to threats. Movement, even just light shifting, signals safety." They spent 3 hours exploring the site, their conversation flowing from technical specifications to broader philosophies about how buildings shape human experience. By the time they reached the rooftop, where the garden would eventually be installed, Harrison realized he'd never shared his passion for his work so openly with someone who truly understood. "Hungry?" he asked as they returned their safety gear. "Starving," Julia admitted. "Talking architecture always makes me ravenous." They ended up at a small Vietnamese restaurant a few blocks away, tucked into a corner booth with steaming bowls of pho between them. Julia had a smudge of dirt on her cheek from the construction site, and Harrison found it unreasonably endearing. "So," Julia said, twirling noodles with her chopsticks, "why hospitals? Miller Construction could be building luxury condos or corporate headquarters. Why focus on health care?" Harrison hesitated, not accustomed to sharing personal details, but something about Julia invited confidence. "My father was in a car accident when I was 14, he said finally. "He spent months in a hospital, a dreary, depressing place with flickering fluorescent lights and views of a brick wall. I used to bring him architectural magazines because he loved buildings. We'd dream up better hospitals, places that helped heal instead of making you feel sicker." Julia's eyes were soft with understanding. "And now you're building them?" "Trying to," Harrison nodded. "He didn't make it, but I think he'd approve of what we're doing." "I know he would," Julia said simply, her hand briefly covering his on the table. That touch, brief and seemingly casual, sent warmth spreading through Harrison's chest. This wasn't how he'd expected to spend his Saturday, covered in construction dust, eating pho with his sister's friend, talking about his father. Yet he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so comfortable, so understood. After lunch, neither seemed eager to part ways. They ended up walking along the riverfront, the conversation shifting to Julia's work at the gallery and her upcoming exhibition on urban transformation. "You should come," she said as they leaned against the railing, watching boats pass. "It's next Friday." Very casual, not one of those stuffy openings Olivia probably warned you about. "I'd like that," Harrison replied, surprised to find he meant it. Art openings usually ranked just above dental surgery on his list of preferred activities. The afternoon stretched on, neither suggesting they end their impromptu day together. They discovered shared interests in historical documentaries and Thai food, a mutual dislike of social media and reality television. By the time the sun began to set, they'd covered miles of the riverfront and hours of conversation. "I should probably get home to feed Pixel," Julia said eventually, checking her phone. "He turns destructive when dinner is late." "Let me drive you," Harrison offered. "My car's not far." "You don't have to. This wasn't exactly a planned excursion. I've already taken up your entire Saturday." "I've enjoyed every minute," Harrison said simply. The look that passed between them held a new awareness, an acknowledgement that something unexpected was happening. The drive to Julia's apartment was quieter than before, a comfortable silence punctuated by soft music from the radio. When they arrived, Harrison walked her to the door of her building. "Thank you for the tour," Julia said, keys in hand. "Both of the hospital and apparently half the city." "Thank you for making me see it all with fresh eyes," Harrison replied. Then, gathering his courage, he added, "I'd like to see you again. Not as my sister's friend or for a professional consultation, just you and me." Julia's smile was warm, genuine. "I'd like that too, very much. Tomorrow." "Dinner? Aren't CEOs supposed to play hard to get?" she teased. I'm efficiently pursuing what interests me, Harrison countered, enjoying the light in her eyes. Time management is a valuable skill. In that case, yes to dinner, text me the details. Harrison leaned down, hesitating briefly before placing a gentle kiss on her cheek. Good night, Julia. Good night, Harrison. He drove home feeling lighter than he had in years, already planning where to take her for dinner. He wanted someplace special but not ostentatious, somewhere they could continue their conversation without pretense. Sunday evening found them at a small Italian restaurant owned by a family that had supplied stonework for several Miller construction projects. The owner greeted Harrison warmly, leading them to a quiet table in a corner beneath a trellis covered in fairy lights. Is this okay? Harrison asked as they settled in. Not too much. Julia glanced around at the charming, unpretentious space. It's perfect. Though I'm starting to think you're nothing like the man Olivia described. What did she tell you? That you're brilliant but married to your company, that you live in a minimalist penthouse and eat protein bars instead of meals, that you haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. Harrison winced. All true, unfortunately. And yet here you are in a romantic Italian restaurant on a Sunday night looking remarkably relaxed, Julia observed, her eyes warm with interest. Here I am, Harrison agreed, wondering at it himself. Maybe I needed the right reason to step away from work. Dinner stretched into hours of conversation, their knees occasionally brushing under the table, their hands finding reasons to touch when reaching for bread or passing dishes to share. By dessert, Harrison knew he was in trouble. This wasn't a passing interest or a convenient distraction. He was falling for Julia Gardner, rapidly and without reservation. As the next few weeks passed, Harrison found himself restructuring his entire life around seeing Julia. He delegated meetings he would normally have handled personally. He left the office at reasonable hours. He even attended one of Olivia's gallery events, much to his sister's astonishment. What have you done to my brother? Olivia demanded, cornering Julia at the exhibition. He just had a 15-minute conversation with Professor Winters about abstract expressionism without looking at his phone once. Julia laughed, glancing across the room where Harrison was examining a large photograph with genuine interest. I haven't done anything. Maybe he's just evolving. Into what? A human being who enjoys life. Olivia shook her head in mock dismay. It's disturbing. Next thing you know, he'll start taking weekends off. What Olivia didn't know was that Harrison had already done exactly that. The previous weekend, he and Julia had driven to the coast, spending 2 days walking on beaches and eating at seaside cafes. Harrison had left his laptop at home, checking his phone only occasionally. It had been the most relaxing weekend he could remember. After the exhibition, as they walked to Harrison's car, Julia brought up Olivia's comments. Am I disrupting your routine too much? She asked. I know your work is important. Harrison stopped walking, turning to face her under a streetlight. You're not disrupting anything. You're enhancing everything. Then he kissed her, properly this time, not the careful goodnight kisses they'd shared before. Julia responded instantly, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. I've never said that to anyone before. Julia's eyes widened slightly, then softened. I'm falling in love with you too. It's terrifying and wonderful all at once. Terrifying? Harrison asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You're Harrison Miller. You run a multi-million-dollar company. You build hospitals and schools and community centers. I'm just a gallery curator with student loans and a cat who shreds furniture. You're Julia Gardner, Harrison corrected gently. You understand spaces and how they affect people better than anyone I've ever met. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be more than just work. Julia's smile was brilliant, even as tears gathered in her eyes. When you put it that way. They didn't make it back to Harrison's car for another 10 minutes, lost in each other under the streetlight, oblivious to passers-by. When they finally drove to Julia's apartment, Harrison accepted her invitation to come upstairs, meeting the infamous Pixel, who immediately claimed Harrison's lap, and talking until the early hours of the morning. As their relationship deepened over the following months, Harrison found himself changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. He started joining Julia for community art projects in underserved neighborhoods. She accompanied him to construction sites, offering perspectives that often improved the final designs. They became partners in unexpected ways, their different backgrounds and perspectives creating something stronger together. 6 months after meeting at Olivia's engagement dinner, Harrison took Julia to the Sunshine Project, now nearing completion. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to the rooftop garden, now lush with plants and winding pathways. Julia gasped at the transformation. What had been bare concrete on her first visit was now a verdant oasis, with sections devoted to medicinal herbs, flowering plants, and quiet seating areas. "Harrison, it's magnificent," she breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. "There's one more feature we added," Harrison said, guiding her toward a sheltered corner where a small bronze plaque was mounted on a stone wall. Julia leaned closer to read the inscription. "The Julia Gardner Healing Garden, where art and nature meet to restore the human spirit." She turned to him, speechless with surprise, only to find Harrison on one knee before her, a small box in his hand. "Your insights shaped this space," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Just like you've shaped me these past months. I used to think buildings were my legacy. Now I know that how we live, who we love, that's what truly matters." He opened the box, revealing a ring with a classic emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. "Julia Gardner, you walked into my life unexpectedly and showed me what I'd been missing. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Julia's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Harrison, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her, Harrison marveled at how completely his life had changed since that engagement dinner. He'd gone expecting nothing more than an obligatory family event. Instead, he'd found the love of his life. They were married the following spring in the same rooftop garden where he'd proposed. Olivia, already married to Ethan by then, served as Julia's matron of honor. The ceremony was intimate but filled with warmth, much like the home they'd created together, merging Harrison's minimalist penthouse with Julia's eclectic style. 2 years later, Harrison sat in a hospital room, not one he'd built, but one in the Sunshine Project, holding his newborn daughter, Emma. Julia watched from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "She has your eyes," Harrison murmured, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "And your determination," Julia replied with a tired smile. 20 hours of labor proves she's as stubborn as her father." Harrison laughed softly, overwhelmed with love for both of them. "Thank you," he said, looking up at his wife, "for Emma, for her, for us, for making me go to that dinner, for everything." Julia's smile deepened. "I think we have Olivia to thank for the dinner part." "Remind me to buy her something extravagant," Harrison said, moving to sit beside Julia on the bed, carefully cradling Emma between them. As sunlight streamed through the large windows of the room windows designed to bring healing natural light to patients, Harrison reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him here. He'd built his career creating spaces for others to heal, to learn, to live. But it wasn't until Julia that he'd truly understood what made a life well built. Not the structures you created, but the love you shared within them. Emma yawned, her tiny face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into sleep. Harrison and Julia exchanged glances, the kind that held years of understanding and promises kept, of challenges faced together and joys multiplied by sharing. "I love you," Harrison said simply, the words now as natural as breathing. "I love you too," Julia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Always will." Outside their window, the city stretched toward the horizon, filled with buildings and people and countless stories unfolding. But in that quiet hospital room, with the family he never expected to find, Harrison knew he'd finally built something truly lasting, a life founded on love, stronger and more beautiful than anything he could have designed alone.